A voice cut through the calm air, sharp as a blade. "Sir, you must leave this seat immediately." The business class cabin fell silent. All eyes turned toward the black man seated quietly in 1A, Adrian Miles, 50 years old, his posture straight, his gaze steady behind silver-rimmed glasses. On his lap lay an open copy of the Financial Times, the bold headline mocking him: Sky East Airlines, entering a new era of consolidation. Adrian did not move. He only raised his head slightly, calm to the point that it made the air around him more tense. But to flight attendant Melissa Carter, 34, the man looked like someone who had slipped into a world meant only for the privileged. "This seat is reserved for true premium passengers," Melissa said, her voice pitched high enough for the entire cabin to hear. Beside her, Richard Hall, 47, arms folded smugly, nodded in approval. With his platinum card gleaming on his jacket, he believed he was the rightful owner of 1A. A flash of light from the window cut across Adrian's cheek, surrounding him in a circle of stares. A few passengers raised their phones, instinctively recording the moment they thought they would see someone who didn't belong dragged away. Melissa stepped closer, blocking the aisle. "I need to see your credit card and boarding pass. This is a required procedure." Her tone was cold, final. Adrian quietly opened his leather case and drew out a neatly folded boarding pass. He placed it in her hand without a word. Melissa held it to the light, frowning, as though hoping to catch a flaw. "Could be fraud. We've had cases of forged documents recently." A ripple of whispers spread. Richard cleared his throat with theatrical weight. "I have a multi-million-dollar meeting waiting. We can't let this kind of disruption slow us down." He stressed the word, kind, as though Adrian was an intruder to be cast out. A woman's voice rang out, trembling but firm. Chloe Anderson, 27, seated in row 2, raised her phone. "This is racism. I'm live streaming. People online will see the truth." On her screen, the caption read clearly, "Discrimination in first class." Viewers jumped from dozens to hundreds. Melissa flushed. "Turn that phone off. This is an internal matter." Chloe didn't budge. "No, this is evidence." Adrian remained silent, but his jaw tightened. A thin sheet of ice was holding back a storm. He looked directly at Melissa, his voice low but resonant. "Tell me, what is it about my appearance that makes you doubt me?" The question landed like steel. Melissa froze, her rehearsed script collapsing. I'm only following procedure." "Procedure applied only to me?" Adrian cut in, his eyes shifting to Richard. "When was the last time you had to show a credit card to sit in business class?" Richard faltered. I'm platinum. They know me." "Know you because of your frequent flyer record or because of your skin color?" The air froze. For a long moment, no one dared to breathe. Chloe gripped her phone tighter, whispering, "Oh my God, he just flipped it on them." The live stream erupted, comments flooding. "Exactly right. Caught red-handed." Melissa scrambled to regain control. "If you don't cooperate, I'll have to call security. We have the right to reassign seats." Adrian smiled faintly, thin and icy. "Call them. Let the world see how a black passenger, sitting in the seat he paid for, is dragged out because he doesn't fit your standards." A shiver rippled through the cabin. An elderly woman in row 3 whispered to her husband, "He's right. It's so obvious." But she quickly looked down, avoiding Adrian's eyes, like so many others, content to watch but afraid to intervene. Adrian calmly folded his newspaper, the motion sharp, like closing a chapter. In the glare from the window, his eyes shifted, no longer the gaze of a humiliated passenger, but of a man holding the power to shake an entire system. Melissa swallowed hard. For the first time, her hands trembled around the ticket. Richard's frown deepened, unease spreading across his face. And at the center of it all sat Adrian Miles, the man dismissed only minutes before, now emanating the quiet authority of a force none of them had foreseen. The business class cabin felt suffocating, like a courtroom awaiting judgment. No one yet knew that in just a few minutes, the true identity of the man in seat 1A would send the entire airline into turmoil. Whispers rippled through the business class cabin like undercurrents. Phones were raised, their screens glowing as they captured every detail. Melissa gripped the boarding pass tightly, trying to steady her trembling hands, but her voice still cut like a blade. "You are disturbing the order. If you don't present a credit card, I will call security immediately." Richard Hall seized the moment, his voice booming like a judge delivering a verdict. "Exactly. We cannot let someone who doesn't belong here delay this flight. I have a multi-million-dollar deal waiting in New York. Give me my rightful seat." A few voices chimed in from behind, not out of belief in Richard, but out of fear of delay. In their eyes, Adrian Miles had suddenly become an obstacle, no longer just another passenger. Adrian lifted his head, his gaze calm yet piercing. He did not need to shout, nor to defend. His voice was deep and clear, like the toll of a church bell. "Seat 1A, purchased 3 weeks ago. A valid ticket. I have already presented it." Melissa fumbled, flipping the ticket back and forth as though desperately searching for another reason. "But this could be counterfeit. We need to ensure safety." Adrian tilted his head, a thin, icy smile on his lips. "Did you ask for his credit card?" He pointed directly at Richard. The cabin shifted. Richard froze for a second, then stammered. I'm a platinum member. They know me." Adrian's tone hardened, each word striking like a hammer. "They know you because of your frequent flyer record, or because of the color of your skin?" The question cut through the veneer of politeness. The cabin fell deathly silent. Chloe Anderson angled her camera, whispering into her live stream. "He just said the truth everyone's been avoiding." Viewers surged from hundreds to nearly 2,000, comments flooding in. "Caught red-handed! This is racism live in front of us!" Melissa felt the ground slipping from beneath her. Her face went pale, yet she forced her voice to sound firm. "If you just cooperate, I can arrange another first-class seat for you on the next flight." Adrian raised an eyebrow, his smile thin, dripping with irony. "Rearrange the very seat I purchased and am already sitting in? How generous." An elderly woman in row 3 muttered to her husband, "This isn't right at all." But she quickly looked down, unwilling to be drawn in. Adrian's gaze locked onto Melissa. He read her name slowly from her badge. Melissa Carter. The name echoed through the cabin like a warning. He leaned forward, his voice low but burning with restrained fire. "Call security, and remember every word you say, every action, is being recorded." Melissa froze. Her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the ticket. Richard cleared his throat loudly, desperate to break the silence. "We're wasting time. Call them now. I won't let someone like him ruin my schedule." Adrian turned toward Richard, his eyes cutting deep. His voice was sharp, like cross-examination before a court. "When have you ever been asked to prove that you were worthy of the seat you paid for?" Richard opened his mouth, but no words came. His breath grew shallow, spilling into the heavy air. Around the cabin, eyes began to shift. At first they had been curious, then doubtful of Adrian. Now, they turned on Melissa and Richard, eyes that had seen the undeniable truth. The ground announcement came over the speakers. Flight 2NA to New York will depart in 25 minutes. Passengers, please settle into your seats. But inside business class, nothing was settled. Chloe turned her camera back to Adrian, whispering with excitement. He's not just anyone. The way he speaks, it's like he holds immense power in his hands. Adrian calmly folded his newspaper and slipped it into his leather case. The gesture was composed, but it carried the weight of an indictment. He lifted his gaze, cold yet blazing with fire. Your procedures are not about safety. They exist only to legitimize prejudice. Melissa drew in a sharp breath, fear consuming her eyes. Richard stepped back, his heartbeat quickening. The confidence drained from his face. Adrian sat tall, his hand resting on his case. He did not need to shout, nor prove anything further. With a single statement, he had turned the business class cabin into a courtroom, where those who thought themselves powerful now stood as the accused. And in that moment, those around them sensed the truth. The man in seat 1A was not just a passenger. He was a storm waiting to be unleashed, a storm that could sweep away an entire system. The atmosphere in business class hung heavy, like a stone suspended over everyone's heads. Melissa swallowed hard, forcing her voice to stay firm. You are obstructing operations. If you do not cooperate, I will call security right now. Richard Hall piled on, his voice sharp with impatience. What are you waiting for? Call them in, drag him out. I can't afford to miss a $20 million deal because of someone who doesn't know how the game is played. Adrian Miles calmly set his leather case down, his fingers brushing slowly across the lock as if preparing to reveal a secret. He looked up, his eyes still as a lake, yet glinting like a blade. The game? He said. Then let me remind you what the real law is. He leaned back, his voice even and resonant. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title II, explicitly prohibits denying service on the basis of race, color, or national origin. And 49 U.S. Code 040127, Aviation Law, forbids airlines from discriminating against passengers. The cabin froze. Passengers, live streaming, gasped. He knows the statutes by heart. Chloe's stream exploded with comments. He's a lawyer. Destroy them. History in the making, Melissa stammered, her face drained of color. I'm only following internal policy. Adrian tilted his head, his voice cutting cold. What internal policy allows you to demand my credit card while ignoring the white man behind me? Show me the document right now. Richard's heart raced, his words faltering. I'm platinum. They know me. Adrian cut him off, his voice striking like a gavel. They know you because of your mileage record, or because of your skin color? In that moment, the truth stood naked, with nowhere left to hide. An elderly woman in row 3 whispered more audibly this time. He's right. This is unjust. But still she did not rise, only stared at her trembling hands. Her silence exposed the shared fear. Everyone knew, yet no one dared to step forward. Melissa, desperate to regain authority, raised the boarding pass high, her voice sharp. You are obstructing operations. If you do not leave, I will call security under Federal Regulation 121.580. Adrian laughed, not with humor, but like a blade striking down. Section 121.580 refers to passengers refusing safe and reasonable instructions. Tell me, how does demanding my credit card, only because my skin is black, have anything to do with flight safety? Gasps filled the cabin. Richard stumbled back half a step, his face flushed, his mouth open but speechless. Chloe turned her camera, whispering to her live stream. "He just turned this cabin into a courtroom, and he is winning." Viewers surged from 2,000 to 4,000. Comments poured in. "Systemic racism caught live. Sue them all." Melissa's shoulders shook, her body curling in on itself. She knew she was losing the battle she had started, but pride and fear of humiliation kept her voice rigid. "Security is on the way. When they arrive, you will have to explain yourself." Adrian leaned forward slightly, his voice low but thunderous in the silence. "No, it is you who will explain to the law, to the public, and to history." In the stark white light of a business class, his eyes blazed like sparks, warning of a coming storm. Those who thought this was only an argument over a seat now realized they were witnessing the beginning of a far greater confrontation. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the cabin entrance. Security was on its way. The business class cabin held its breath. And in seat 1A, Adrian Miles sat tall, ready to turn this moment into a verdict that could seal the fate of an entire airline. The sound of hurried footsteps pounded down the aisle, each step like a war drum beating into the tense business class cabin. The door burst open. A petite woman with eyes sharp as blades stepped inside. It was Laura Bennett, 55, a veteran flight manager with more than 20 years of experience. "What is happening here?" Her voice was low, steady, and cut through the heavy air like a spear. Melissa nearly broke into tears at the sight of reinforcement. She rushed out her words, trembling, desperate. "The man in seat 1A refused to show his credit card. He is not cooperating with security protocol. I had no choice but to request security." Laura folded her arms, her gaze locked on Melissa. "Refused to cooperate in what specific way?" The question landed like a hammer blow. Melissa faltered, her words stumbling where moments ago they had flowed. He produced the ticket, but the amount was large. I feared fraud." Adrian sat tall, his eyes calm yet filled with authority. He pushed the ticket toward Laura, his voice deep and steady, carrying an icy edge. "Seat 1A. Ticket purchased 3 weeks ago. Valid. Fully in the system. The problem is not in the data, but in the way your people select which customers to question." His words fell heavy as iron. Laura wavered for a moment, but before she could respond, Richard Hall burst in, his face flushed with anger. "I am a Platinum member. I fly this route twice a month. That seat should have been mine. The airline cannot let someone like him delay us all." Murmurs broke out across the cabin. Chloe, still live streaming, tilted her phone and whispered to tens of thousands watching. "Did you hear that? Someone like him. This isn't a misunderstanding anymore. This is blatant prejudice." Laura frowned, trying to restore order. "Everyone, please calm down. We can make adjustments in special cases. Platinum passengers are often given priority." Adrian cut her off, his voice sharp and unyielding, slicing through the fog. "There are no special cases here. There is only a flight attendant and a passenger trying to turn skin color into a clause in the contract." A crushing silence spread across the cabin. Chloe nearly shouted into her stream. "He said it outright. This isn't confusion, it's discrimination." Viewers spiked past 5,000, comments flooding in. "Expose them. This is racism in real time." Richard clenched his teeth, snapping back. "Don't turn this into a racial issue. This is just policy." Adrian turned his gaze on him, eyes cold as steel. "What policy? Put it in writing. Show me. Otherwise, everything you have said is nothing but arbitrary and biased." The cabin sank into silence. Every eye turned to Laura, the only one who could salvage the situation. but sweat beaded on her forehead. In her earpiece, operations control on the ground barked urgently. "The stock price is shifting on rumors. Report immediately." Laura gripped her iPad tightly, her eyes darting between Melissa, Richard, and Adrian. What lay before her was no longer a seating dispute, but a ticking bomb, powerful enough to shake the entire airline. Adrian leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering into the weight of an indictment. "You are the manager. Then manage. Because if you continue to cover this up, this airline will lose more than one passenger. It will lose the trust of the market." His words slammed down, and Richard paled instantly. Melissa trembled, her eyes wide with fear. Laura said nothing, but her heart pounded violently. In the white light of the business class cabin, the truth stood naked. The man in seat 1A was not a troublemaker. He was the storm-gathering force, and any decision now would decide the fate of the entire airline. The sound of heavy footsteps pounded against the aisle floor, each strike like war drums crashing into the business class cabin. The door swung open. 2 security officers in dark blue uniforms stepped inside, their presence heavy as if dragging in a storm. Officer Grant, in his 40s, shoulders broad like a wall. Officer Lopez, younger, eyes sharp, but tinged with hesitation. The cabin instantly fell silent. Passengers held their breath in their throats. Chloe raised her phone high, whispering into her live stream. "Security is here. This is the moment of truth." Melissa pointed immediately, her voice trembling yet urgent. "It's him, the passenger in seat 1A. He refused to comply, rejected the process, disrupted order." Grant nodded, his hand hovering near the cuffs on his belt. His eyes fixed on Adrian, already presuming guilt. But Adrian did not move. He sat upright, his leather case beside him, his gaze steady and cold. His voice rang out, slow yet sharp as steel. "Before you write a single line in your report, listen to me. I am seated quietly in the chair I paid for. They demanded documents no one else here had to show. Why? Because my appearance made them uncomfortable." The words fell like a verdict. Lopez flinched, his eyes flickering toward Melissa and Richard. The confidence in his stance began to waver. Richard cut in impatiently, his tone dripping arrogance. "Don't turn this into a race issue. This is about seating policy." Adrian turned sharply, his eyes blazing, his voice striking like a gavel. "What policy? Produce it. If you cannot, then it is not policy. It is prejudice, dressed up as procedure." The cabin froze. Chloe whispered to the thousands watching live. "Do you hear this? He's peeling away every layer of their cover." Grant frowned, trying to maintain authority. "Sir, our duty is to preserve security. If you refuse to cooperate..." Adrian interrupted, his voice dropping lower, each word hammered into silence. "Security is not threatened by a passenger reading his paper in the seat he purchased. Security is threatened by discrimination built into your staff's conduct." Murmurs rippled across the cabin. An elderly woman in row 3 spoke, her voice trembling. "He's right. I've flown business class for decades. I have never once been asked for a credit card. This is injustice." Melissa's face drained of color, sweat breaking across her forehead. Richard faltered, stepping back, cold sweat forming on his brow. Adrian slowly opened his case. The click of the lock echoed like a gunshot. But he did not draw a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a thick silver-edged dossier, gleaming under the cabin lights. Numbers, charts, and legal documents glinted on the cover. He placed it firmly on the tray table, his voice resonant like judgment itself. This is not just a boarding pass. This is a $500 million contract your airline is desperate for. And I—" He paused, his gaze sweeping across the cabin. "Am the one who decides whether it lives or dies." The cabin erupted in stunned silence. Hearts skipped beats. Chloe nearly shouted into her camera, "Oh my God, he is the airline's biggest investor." Livestream numbers soared past 10,000. Comments surging. "This is history. He owns the deal." Grant's hand froze on his cuffs. Lopez swallowed hard, eyes conflicted. Melissa trembled, the ticket slipping from her grasp. Richard stumbled back another step, his face pale. In the stark white light of business class, Adrian Miles sat proud, like the highest judge. From a suspect passenger, he had revealed himself as the man holding life and death power over the entire airline. And everyone knew the real storm had only just begun. Whispers rippled through business class like waves crashing against the cabin walls. Chloe clutched her phone tightly, whispering into her live stream, "Do you hear this? He is the man holding the $500 million deal. This is not just about a seat." Laura Bennett, the flight manager, gripped her iPad, sweat beading on her forehead. Her pulse raced in her neck. She had faced hundreds of emergencies, but never before had the floor of business class felt like thin ice cracking beneath her feet. Adrian Miles slowly rose. He did not rush. Every movement was precise, like a surgeon's scalpel. The entire cabin held its breath, eyes locked on him. He closed the dossier with deliberate calm, his voice deep and resonant. "I am Adrian Miles, chairman of Miles Equity Partners. My firm holds the decision-making power over this airline's $500 million merger. And just moments ago, you all witnessed how this company's employees treated me, not as a paying customer, but as an intruder to be thrown out of a seat I purchased legally." His words struck with the weight of a hammer. Melissa Carter gasped, "Oh my God." Her voice trailed off. Her hand shook so badly she could no longer hold the ticket. It slipped from her grip, spinning before landing silently on the floor like evidence in a trial. Richard Hall stood frozen, his face drained from flushed red to deathly pale. The arrogance of platinum status dissolved, leaving only fear. Officer Grant let his hand fall from the cuffs at his waist, his lips pressed into a thin line. Lopez looked at Adrian as though at a judge who had just delivered a sentence. Adrian swept his gaze across the cabin, his eyes drilling into every face. His voice was steady, but its authority froze the air. "You have witnessed it yourselves, and you are live streaming it to the world. Ask yourselves, who is truly disrupting this flight? The man sitting quietly reading his newspaper, or those who tried to weaponize prejudice to humiliate him?" The silence was suffocating. Chloe turned her camera, her voice trembling with emotion. "He has turned seat 1 into a pulpit of justice." Laura struggled to speak, her voice unsteady. "Mr. Miles, I am certain this was only a misunderstanding." Adrian cut her off, his words slicing like a blade. "No, this is not a misunderstanding. This is culture. A culture that devalues customers of color. And if it does not change, that culture will sink this entire airline." Passengers who had been silent began to stir, nodding, murmuring. "He's right. I've seen this before." Richard tried to speak, his voice shaking, desperate to salvage his dignity. "Mr. Miles, please understand. I didn't mean. I only wanted the flight to be on time." Adrian turned to him, his eyes cold as steel. "You didn't mean it? When you said, 'a man like him,' that was no slip of the tongue. That was the truth in your heart. And today, tens of thousands are hearing that truth. Richard staggered back, his trembling hand pressed to his forehead. Adrian returned to seat 1A, lowering himself into it as though it were his throne. He tapped his finger lightly against the tray table, the dry sound carrying through the silence. This airline has a choice. Either fix this from the roots or lose the deal, lose trust, and lose its future. Business class fell silent, but the world outside was erupting. On Chloe's screen, viewers surged past 15,000. Comments flooded in. History unfolding. He just flipped the entire airline upside down. And everyone in that cabin knew. This was no longer an argument over a seat. This was a systemic crisis, and Adrian Miles had just placed his hand on the trigger. The cabin was heavy as a courtroom. Every eye was fixed on Adrian Miles, the man still seated upright in 1A. Yet the authority radiating from him had turned that seat into a throne of power. He opened the dossier, his voice booming, slow and deliberate like the toll of a church bell. This is what will happen if your airline wants to survive. 5 conditions. No compromise. No negotiation. The cabin was silent. Melissa choked back a sob. Richard trembled. Laura Bennett clutched her iPad so tightly her knuckles turned white. Adrian raised one finger. First, every employee directly involved in this incident will be terminated immediately. Not suspended, not disciplined internally. Terminated. Tears streamed down Melissa's face as she stammered. Please, I have 3 children. Adrian's eyes were ice. You should have thought of them before you turned discrimination into habit. He raised a second finger. Second, all frontline employees, from ticket counters to gate agents to flight attendants, will undergo unconscious bias and anti-discrimination training, not a cheap online module, but in-person sessions with civil rights experts. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Some passengers nodded. Others glanced at one another in shock. A third finger lifted, his voice sharp as a blade. Third, from now on, every customer interaction must be monitored with body cameras worn by staff. All data will be stored in an independent system controlled by a third party. No concealment, no excuses. Lopez, the younger security officer, stiffened. He glanced at Grant, and both remained silent. Adrian raised his fourth finger, his eyes locking on Laura, the flight manager. Fourth, diversity and equity audits will take place monthly. Reports will be made public. No edits, no burying. If you fear the light, you don't deserve to exist in this industry. Laura bowed her head, her breathing labored, each word cutting into her like a blade. Then the final finger rose. The cabin held its breath. Fifth, any complaint of discrimination must be escalated directly to the highest level of leadership within 24 hours. If it happens again, the entire board of directors will be held accountable before shareholders and the public. Business class fell dead silent. Outside, the engines hummed like background music for a proclamation that would alter fate. Adrian lowered his hand, his voice dropping but still rumbling like thunder. You have 90 days. If not, Miles Equity will withdraw every dollar of investment and announce the reason publicly. Systemic racism. A heavy silence followed. Then Richard Hall's labored breathing broke it. He laughed, a twisted sound. You can't force an airline to overhaul its entire system in 3 months. That's impossible. Adrian turned, his eyes blazing. Impossible? You've had years to fix it. I am giving you 90 days that is mercy. The cabin erupted in whispers, but no one dared to oppose him. Chloe gripped her phone, whispering into her live stream. You just heard the ultimatum. This isn't a passenger protesting, this is a leader rewriting the rules. Viewership surged past 20,000. Comments flooded the stream. This is history. Respect equal profit. Miles protocol now. Adrian leaned back in his seat, a faint smile crossing his lips. He knew in that moment, the airline had no choice left but to bow. The crackle of the intercom suddenly cut through the murmurs, drowning out every whisper. Attention Flight 218. By direct order of the Board of Directors, the entire business class cabin will now be reserved for an emergency session. The cabin froze in disbelief. A commercial flight turned into a boardroom? It was unprecedented. Laura Bennett dropped her iPad, her heart pounding violently. Melissa collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her cheeks. Richard Hall stood frozen, mouth agape. His platinum smile erased without a trace. Adrian Miles remained seated upright in 1A, as though everything unfolding was part of a script he had written himself. He slowly folded the Financial Times and placed it neatly on his leather case. A piercing satellite feed burst through the speakers, followed by a sharp female voice, deep and commanding, slicing through the air. Mr. Miles, this is Jennifer Liu, Chief Executive Officer. I, along with the entire board, am online. Legal, finance, and PR are here. Please state your demands formally. The air turned to stone. Chloe lifted her phone closer to her face, whispering into her live stream. You guys, the entire airline board is listening right now in real time on this plane. Viewership skyrocketed. 40,000, 50,000. Adrian adjusted the microphone embedded in his seat, his voice booming through the cabin, slow and resonant like the tolling of a clock. The 5 conditions have been stated. 90 days to execute. No bargaining. No delay. On the other end came the clatter of frantic typing, muffled whispers of panic. Then CFO David Morrison's strained voice broke in. Mr. Miles, the cost of these reforms, at minimum, $18 million. We cannot. Adrian let out a dry laugh, snapping open the dossier and holding it up toward Chloe's live stream so every viewer could see. 18 million in costs? Last year, this airline spent 23.7 million settling discrimination lawsuits. And today, this single incident alone could expose you to over 2 million in damages. You call that savings? I call it blood draining from your balance sheet. The cabin held its breath. Each number struck like artillery, shredding their defenses. Jennifer Liu's voice returned, taut but measured. Mr. Miles, we acknowledge the issue, but to overhaul the entire system in 90 days, logistically, it is impossible. Adrian narrowed his eyes, his gaze sharp as a scalpel. No, this is not a logistical problem. This is a cultural problem. And culture either changes or is erased. Richard Hall blurted out, his voice trembling. How do you know so much about the inside, the reports, the figures? Adrian turned to him, his smile like ice. Miles Equity doesn't put $500 million on the table without knowing every crack in the system. I know you better than you know yourselves. The cabin quaked. Chloe whispered shakily into her camera. He just turned business class into a miniature parliament. This isn't about a seat anymore. This is a full-blown hearing. A long silence stretched. Then the voice of CEO Thomas Reed rang out, deep but shaking. Mr. Miles, the board of directors accepts all conditions. 5 points, 90 days. Please give us a public statement to stabilize the situation. Adrian leaned back, closed his eyes for a beat, then opened them, his voice resonating through the cabin and across tens of thousands of devices streaming live. Remember this is not about money. This is about dignity. And in business, dignity is the most profitable asset you can own. The cabin erupted in a stunned silence. Chloe wept, her live stream topping 70,000 viewers. Comments flooded the screen. "Dignity, profit. Miles' protocol begins now." Adrian Miles closed the dossier, his eyes blazing. He had just forced a corporate giant to bow in submission, mid-air. Morning light streamed across the glass towers of SkyEast Airlines headquarters in New York. 6 weeks had passed since the moment business class turned into a courtroom in the sky. Now, the company was undergoing a forced rebirth. In the conference room on the 30th floor, a massive LED screen glowed. Dr. Alicia Monroe, a sociologist newly appointed as Chief Diversity and Equity Officer, a role that had never existed before, stood before the board. Her voice rang out firm and commanding. 94% of central airports have deployed body cameras for frontline staff. In the past 6 weeks, not a single discrimination complaint has been recorded. 0. This is a number unprecedented in the history of this airline. A wave of astonishment rippled through the room. Before, the company had handled dozens of complaints each month, spending millions in settlements. Now, the shining number 0 stood as undeniable proof. Thomas Reed, the CEO, sat at the head of the table, his hair grayer after weeks of relentless pressure. He nodded heavily, like a man who had just escaped a blade at his throat. Beside him, Jennifer Liu, the COO, scribbled furiously, every line a shield for her career. Alicia advanced the slide. A chart appeared, its arrow shooting skyward. 100% of frontline staff have completed unconscious bias training. 78% admitted they once held prejudices. More than half stated their perspectives changed after the course. Eyes flickered across the table. Executives realized the harsh truth. The issue had never been a handful of individuals, but a culture rotting from within. On the live stream from Chicago, Adrian Miles appeared in a charcoal gray suit with a deep blue tie. He did not need to pound the table or raise his voice. His presence alone silenced the room. "Dr. Monroe," Adrian's voice was warm yet unyielding. "Give me the numbers on the customers." A young woman stepped forward, her eyes bright. It was Maria Santos, head of customer experience, the same woman who had spoken up that day in business class. Now she stood tall, confident. "Customer satisfaction has risen 47%, from 2.4 to 4.3 on a 5-point scale. Bookings from minority communities have increased 89%. Positive word of mouth alone has generated $67 million in revenue in just 6 weeks." The room buzzed, some leaning back with relief. But Adrian only smiled faintly, his eyes shining like stone-cut glass. That is the simple lesson. Respect pays dividends. In that moment, the atmosphere shifted. It was no longer a crisis meeting, but a lecture hall. And Adrian, the man once dismissed on a plane, had become the teacher of ethics and economics for an entire corporation. Outside, the press called it the Miles Protocol. On social media, the hashtag #DignityFirst trended for weeks. Each time a passenger recorded an employee serving with care and transparency, they tagged it "Protocol in Action." In the world of business, Miles Protocol had become the new standard. Every service company faced the same question: have you adopted it yet? And it all began with one man sitting quietly in seat 1A, the place once deemed not meant for him. Winter sunlight stretched across the campus of Harvard. Inside the grand lecture hall of the business school, a new case study had been added to the curriculum titled "The Miles Protocol, When Dignity Becomes an Asset." On the giant screen appeared the image that had become iconic. Adrian Miles sitting upright in seat 1A, his gaze cold and unflinching as he faced a flight attendant pointing at him. Beneath the picture were the words, "Power is not found in the highest seat. Power exists when you use it at the right moment, in the right way." International students filled the hall, scribbling notes furiously. The professor explained, "Within 1 year, SkyEast Airlines increased revenue by 23% compared to pre-crisis levels. Litigation costs from discrimination lawsuits dropped by 89%. This is not just a lesson in risk management, but proof of a greater truth. Fairness generates sustainable profit." In the back row, a few students whispered, "It's hard to believe. All of this began from just one seat on a plane." At a TED conference in Washington, D.C., Adrian walked onto the stage in a modest suit. The applause thundered, but he raised his hand gently, signaling for silence. His voice rang out deep and steady. "Power does not come from shouting louder than others. Power is when you make the world go quiet to listen to the truth." That day, I only wanted to read my paper and fly to New York. But when I was treated as an imposter in the very seat I had paid for, I realized silence meant consent. I stood up not to win for myself, but to force an entire system to change. Thousands in the audience rose to their feet, clapping like rolling thunder. 1 year after the incident, the Miles Protocol had spread far beyond the airline industry. Hotels, banks, retail chains, all announced, "We are adopting the Miles Protocol." Companies saw it as both a shield against public outrage and a key to attracting loyal customers. At the Smithsonian, a new exhibit was unveiled. In the center of a bright gallery stood a perfect recreation of Seat 1A, with a plaque mounted above it. "The birthplace of the Miles Protocol respect." As a core value, visitors stopped to take photos, sharing them online with the hashtag #DignityFirst. Seat 1A had become a living symbol, a reminder that sometimes an entire industry can be shaken by one passenger refusing to give up his seat. In a high-rise office in Chicago, Adrian sat before the window overlooking the shimmering expanse of Lake Michigan. Beside his laptop, he kept the old ticket that bore the words, "Seat 1A." Not as a relic of humiliation, but as proof of the power of saying no at the right moment. He smiled faintly to himself, whispering, "Dignity that is the most enduringly profitable asset." A year ago, the world had called him a troublemaker. Now, the world called him something else. The man who turned dignity into global capital. In the world of business and service, many people mistakenly believe that profit is the only measure of success. But the story of Adrian Miles proved the opposite. Dignity is the most enduring asset of all. A seat that seemed so small, Seat 1A, became the starting point of an entire revolution, turning social justice into business strategy and transforming respect into priceless capital. If you believe stories like this deserve to be shared, reminding us that fairness is not only morally right, but also economically wise, press like on this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the journeys to come. And before you leave a comment with the words, "Respect first," to affirm that in every field, from a single seat on a plane to an entire global system, dignity must always come before profit.